7 saves from Dane St. Clair, 6 road wins on the season for Minnesota United, and 3 big points as they come away with a big 2-1 win in Nashville. And look at this. I got a co-host tonight. It's amazing. I'm Jeremy Rushing, and alongside me, back from Washington, D.C. Well, I say back from. You're back in Missouri, right? You're in Minnesota?
Yeah, back in Missouri. In Missouri.
All right. Well, Eli Hoff from Sota Soccer is joining the post-game show. Eli, how's it going?
It's great, Jeremy. It feels good to be back and focused on Minnesota United things. Spent a little time in the Twin Cities too, so I feel rejuvenated in my interest in Minnesota United, revalidated there, and a great game to get to sit down and watch and talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you get into DC United while you were over out east with all the Wayne Rooney stuff going on?
Yeah, I went to every DC United game I could. Unfortunately, not the most fun franchise to watch. Though Taxi Fountas is a gem of a player.
Yep.
He's like Reynoso in that the second he gets on the ball, everybody kind of gets on the edge of their seat expecting something crazy to happen. I'm sad I left before Christian Benteke made his debut. I think that's a really fun signing for them. We'll see what Wayne Rooney can do, but he has his work cut out for that franchise. I'll say that much.
Speaking of edge of your seat, Eli, before we get into our 3 things, I want to pick your brain on this. Suddenly, Minnesota United is the end-to-end excitement for 90-plus minutes team, which they have not really ever been in their MLS tenure. I mean, they were kind of forced into that in 2017 and 2018 because they didn't have a defense. But when this team has been successful in MLS, it has really been tightening up at the back, countering at the right time, winning 1-0, 2-1 type matches. Now suddenly they're going end to end with some of the better attacking fronts in MLS. What has been sort of the difference in the style of play? And does this style of play, in your opinion, suit this Minnesota United team?
Yeah, I think I don't know if it suits this team, but it's certainly indicative of this team. Because if you look at how in previous years, it feels like the defense has been the really solid part from a personnel standpoint. That up until this year, there was a really solid stretch there where that back line was pretty consistently going to be Mettenair, Boxall, either Opara and then Debasi and Chase Gasper, and that really didn't change too much bar injuries or suspensions, and so that led to a lot of consistency there. And then at that point in time, it was the attack that was going to have a lot of moving pieces of Reynoso became a fixture, but where was Robin Lod going to be playing that week? There was 15 and a half positions on the field where you could write him in. And so there was just less consistency there. Now I think this team is kind of in the opposite spot, that, the front four is pretty much nailed down for every game here at this point. And it's the back four now that has started seeing some changes in there, and we'll probably continue to see some changes here. So I think it's kind of indicative that there's less stability on the defensive end. So there's just going to be more happening there, more for guys like Dane St. Clair to do, and the attack is gelling and is creating more chances. So this team is great at creating chances both for themselves and for others, and that's kind of the state of things. And so far, it seems to be working.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, we're talking about 6 road wins on the year from Minnesota, easily a club record as far as MLS is concerned. This is a team that just continues to be on this great run of form where they're getting results, and it's nice to look at Minnesota United as a team where, man, if they get that home draw, that's seen as a disappointing result. They go on the road and lose a 4-3 barn burner, that's seen as a disappointing result. Like we were just hoping for a point or two in May. And this team was really not looking great. And all of a sudden, you're on a run where, you've only lost once in 9 matches now, a handful of wins in that span. It's really been a different Minnesota United team over these last couple months. And obviously the play of guys like Fragapane, Amaria, Bongi coming along as well in the attack has obviously been a huge difference maker in that. Also, before we get into our 3 things, want to let you know, if you want to drop a question or comment in the chat, please do so. I see a lot of people watching right now on the YouTube stream. So if you're in on YouTube, go ahead and leave that question or comment in the chat for us to read on the air and respond to. If you're watching on Twitter and you want to get involved in the conversation, you will have to go to our YouTube channel. So go to YouTube and just search Post Loons or Sota Soccer. And while you're on the YouTube stream, go ahead and give us that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you could, that would be awesome. Handful of comments to get to before we get into our three things, Eli. First is from Dave Valensky. Hello from Norway. Dave, I got to let you know, you have commented on pretty much every Post Loons live stream. I had no idea you were from Norway. So that even makes it more impressive. It makes me more grateful that you were tuning in all the way from Norway. It says, couldn't watch the game here, only able to gamecast it. Looks like Dane St. Clair had a busy night. Yeah, to say the least. And we will get into that just a little bit. Dave Stevens, most important game in Minnesota United season was the MLS All-Star game. DSC got his mojo back. Adrian Heath said, although it was only 30 minutes that Dane played in the All-Star game, he said in training this week, it was probably 30. It was 30 very important minutes for Dane. Obviously, goalkeeper can be a pretty mental position at times. But Eli, before we actually get into the nitty gritty of our three things, just give me high level what you saw from St. Clair tonight that maybe had been lacking in, say, the Colorado match or even back to the Portland match.
Yeah, it looked like Dane St. Clair in his element, which his element is very much shot stopping. I think there's in a league like MLS, you see just kind of a standard level of shot stopping that anybody who plays goalkeeper can do, right? Like you're not going to last very long in that position if you can't stop shots. And where Dane St. Clair has stood out is in that shot stopping ability. I haven't looked at the stats recently, but he generally stands out in terms of that expected goals to actual goals differential, in that, teams score less on Dane St. Clair than statistical models would expect them to, which means he's great at stopping goals and robbing them. And we saw that tonight with Nashville. At one point, John Strong and Stu Holden on the broadcast were saying that Nashville had racked up over 2 expected goals. And of course, they only had 1 at that point, and they probably racked up even more as the game went. So that's what Dane St. Clair does. Like, that's why you have him. That's why he's a candidate for goalkeeper of the year. There's probably should be some buzz as far as MVP goes, because when you look at a game like tonight, if Dane St. Clair even misses one of those 7 saves, this is a draw, right? If he misses 2 of those, it's probably a loss. Like that's very, very valuable, very, very important. And he looked comfortable with those saves, even the ones where it's full extension, just getting the palm to it. It didn't look like he was panicked. There was one moment where after a save, he pulled DeBassi aside and was giving him some goalkeeper to center back words. But that's something important from Dane St. Clair too, who still is, he's a younger player. For him to have the confidence to make the save, pull one of his center backs aside and say, hey, you need to be doing this. You can't be doing this. That's a really, really valuable trait, as well as this team, is working to stay gelled together and eyeing a playoff run now at this point.
Man, we have so many comments. We could throw the format out the window, guys. If you keep dropping the questions and comments, we'll just keep responding to them. Justin Bergman says, if this run of form continues, we may be challenging Austin for number 2. We do have at least 1 game left with them. I want to see this team leapfrog Dallas first. There's such a gap between 2nd and 3rd right now. Austin obviously getting that huge comeback win yesterday, 4-3 winner at home when they were down 3-1 at half. So they might be a team who's finding their groove, but had struggled recently. But you're still a point behind Dallas for that 3rd spot. And I think that should be the target right now. Once you accomplish that goal of getting by Dallas, then maybe you can maybe put Austin in the crosshairs. But I like the optimism. I like shooting high. But yeah, I want to see us get past Dallas first. In terms of the Western Conference, Eli, from what you see from Minnesota United versus what you see from the Dallases, the Austins, the Seattles, even as they're moving up. RSL is right there, right behind Minnesota as well. Where do you think this Minnesota team really does stack up in this tight Western Conference?
Yeah, I think it's interesting to see that. Obviously it's hard for anybody to stack up with LAFC right now. So I think in terms of playoff seeding, the best playoff seed may not be a number. It may be distance in the bracket from LAFC. That may be the deciding factor of where this team wants to be, to put off facing them as long as possible. I think Minnesota's a side that can hold up well. One of the biggest things that we're going to see over the next 8 weeks is depth. And, what can guys, now that there's more bodies in the midfield, right, with Jonathan Gonzalez, with Will Trapp eventually coming back here, where does that put Robin Lod? Is he, does Bonke come out of the lineup, or does Robin Lod stay in the midfield? That's something, for there to be a lot of debate and conversation about, I think. And so I think that depth is important come playoff time. This is a team that's faced injury issues all year. you want to be prepared for that come playoff time in terms of, being able to, for Adrian Heath, there's a lot of talk about his substitutions, but you at least want him to have the possibility to come the 70, 75th minute to be able to make the changes he needs to either ice a game or go out and get a goal. And having depth will be really important there. And that's something that making these acquisitions in this summer window, I think Minnesota's done a great job setting themselves up for playing late into the fall here, by getting those guys who can contribute at that time of year.
Yeah, we've seen Alan Benitez's impact. Obviously, there's a lot, there's a lot of potential there with Mender Garcia, or a lot of hype around Mender Garcia, obviously using that designated player spot on him. Then we saw Jonathan Gonzalez for about a 10-minute spell tonight. I'm not sure what we can grab from that, but I don't know if there was really ever going to be anything to grab from that initial 10 minutes for Jogo on the field. I think it was just sort of getting him acclimated and continuing to get him ingrained in what Adrian Heath wants to do. And of course, to close out a game, you're going to put in a stalwart number 6. Like Jogo is, although he's not Ozzie Alonso, as they mentioned, or as they showed on the broadcast graphic. That was pretty interesting. They must still have it. They must not have updated number 6 on the Minnesota United roster or something. I don't know how that falls through the cracks, but yeah, when Jogo goes on the field, they put O Alonso on the graphic there. Interesting. Speaking of defensive midfield, and speaking of, you mentioned earlier, where does Robin Lod fit on this team? I think that's kind of been a reoccurring question. Chris Alphaby asks, what happens when Trapp comes back? You can't take Bongi out. And that's interesting because you look at this team has been thin at defensive midfield because of injuries and because of, red card accumulation or yellow card accumulation issues, injuries. Arriaga hasn't been able to consistently stay on the field. Trapp's been out for about 4 weeks now. But Chris has a great point here where once Trapp comes back, and assuming Arriaga is healthy at the same time, all of a sudden now you have a ton of central midfielders that you could throw in and a ton of different combinations that you can use. So that's interesting where you have, your captain, Will Trapp. He could come back. Whose spot does he take? Because you have to take somebody out of that pairing that you may not want to. Who, in your opinion, ends up being the odd man out here, Eli? Because you have Jonathan Gonzalez as well to factor into that situation too.
I think, in all honesty, the odd man out is Will Trapp. We've seen with Adrian Heath. I think a great situation is what happened with goalkeeper. That Tyler Miller was the starter going into this season. Got sick before that New York Red Bulls game. That was week 3, I think. And It's been Dane St. Clair ever since. That I think Adrian Heath and I remember from just when I was there covering this team, that he was always very adamant that players controlled whether or not they had a spot in the starting 11. And he seems like the type of coach where once the players earn that starting role, it's up to them to lose it. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can look at anyone in the starting 11 and say they've lost their spot. I think Bongi's maybe the most vulnerable just because he's a younger guy who's still kind of raw and developing, and Robin Lod can replace him. So like that's kind of probably, if there's going to be a change, you take Bongi out, move Lod up there, and Trapp back in the midfield. That's probably the easiest way to do this. But I wouldn't necessarily expect that at all. I think given what Heath has done with his team in the past, even though yes, Trapp's the captain, they've been playing fantastic without him, and he's a great, having Will Trapp come off the bench is fantastic. Again, I just talked about 75th minute, you need to ice the game, pull off, a Fragapane, Reynoso, Bongi, whoever, an attacking midfielder, put on Trapp and go 4-3-3 with an extra defensive midfielder in, and that's a great way to bunker down there. So I think that's a route that we could see this team go as well.
Yeah, I think, Eli, you mentioned it. I think that's probably the direction it's going to go. As good as Bongi has been, and as much as Chris says that you can't take Bongi out, I probably, just knowing Heath, I think that's probably the direction he will go when Trapp comes back, as I think he goes back to that Trapp Arriaga defensive midfield, and I think he probably moves the lid back to the right wing with Bongi playing a very, very featured sub role on this team, whether it's right wing, whether it's coming in as a backup striker, a second striker if they need one, that sort of situation. But then you also factor in another new signing, Mender Garcia, who can really play anywhere along the front, and the combinations are almost endless. This team is almost embarrassingly deep at this point with these new guys factored in. It's kind of crazy to think about that. Depth has been such a talking point with this Minnesota United team, and it's been such a roller coaster in years where we're like, oh, we think we got it, we think they got it, and then they don't. Oh, we think they got it, and then they don't. And this season we're like, oh, they finally have the depth. But then in the middle of the season, you're like, oh, maybe they don't have the depth. Well, now all of a sudden with these summer transfer window signings, that depth is plentiful, and it creates a lot of questions, but good questions for Adrian Heath. No,
it really does. And I was just thinking now, if we look way ahead and we look at next season, Hassani Dotson coming back, all of a sudden there's a lot of guys on this team who you're starting to look at. How, you can only fit 11 players in the starting lineup, and so I think there will be questions surrounding that next year too. We're getting too far ahead there, but there certainly is a depth aplenty at the moment.
The duo becomes a trio. Looks like we got MJ in the house. Matthew Johnson, what's going on, Matthew?
I'm just here in Wisconsin, and
okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. First, your just initial thoughts on the 2-1 win.
I thought Dane looked improved. I thought parts of our back line looked improved. There's still these nagging bad habits that irk me to, out of my gourd. Weak side ball watching, bad weak side marking. But at the same time, there's so much good happening defensively to get us this win. And, on the front side, no possession, counterattack, make the most of our chances. And like you guys just said, with more attacking pieces coming, some say that could put a wrench in a well-oiled machine. I don't think we have a well-oiled machine. I think more experimentation, more weapons are going to be better.
Yeah, I think especially if you can get those pieces in and try to figure out those right combinations before you get to that playoff run, I think that's crucial. If you're still tinkering in mid to late September, I think that maybe that's an issue. But if you can get these pieces in early, specifically Amender Garcia, if he can get his immigration paperwork finalized and done and, be ready here in mid to late August, I'd really like to see where he specifically factors into this team in the short term. Because obviously being a young guy, 24 years old, he's in the long-term plans for Minnesota, but I'm intrigued to see where he fits in right off the bat. As you mentioned, MJ, with all these attacking pieces, and specifically attacking pieces that have proved themselves on the field so far this season. It'd be tough to just pull one of those out in lieu of a new signing.
If Strongwane can work his way into the starting lineup this season, Mender Garcia has a chance.
Yeah. Eli, what are your thoughts on Mender specifically and how he could affect the attacking depth?
Yeah, I see we have in the comments mentioning, two kind of groups of wingers. That's the approach I use in Football Manager anyway, when it's, a congested schedule, just full out replace them. But I think that could be a route to go here. But I think what it does present is the question of how this team is going to figure out the best combinations, because there are only 8 games here, which is plenty of time to figure this out before the playoffs. But those are 8 games that can't be entirely experimental, right? Like results need to happen, especially if there's going to be a push to, get past Dallas and maybe even try to catch up to Austin in second place here. It can only be experimental to a certain point. It needs to still be effective while that's happening. And so I think, Mender Garcia, obviously on paper and in the highlights, can contribute right away. It comes down to how much he's trusted, how quickly that chemistry can develop. We've seen over the course of the season how well Bongi's developed and how much this match time has meant that, he looks like a different player now than he did at the start of this season. And that's been tremendous to see. And so you also hope that less match time doesn't cost him in any capacity over the next little bit of the season here. But I think it comes down to how fast the best combination can be figured out by Heath here, and how effective the maybe less optimal combinations can be as the squad gets rotated.
Let's reel this back into the match specifically. So we talked about Dane's performance, obviously another featured performer, Franco Fragapane, getting another goal. That's 7 straight matches with a goal or an assist for Franco. Obviously he's somebody who has had his struggles this season, but as he's come into form, Eli, this team has really sort of hit its stride. And we were talking match day one, Eli, after the Philadelphia match, about how important Fragapane is to this team. After that, we saw the downswing that led to the team's downswing, but now he's clicking on all cylinders, and so is this Minnesota United attack.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely zero coincidence that as this team has kind of resurged and rebounded, that Fragapane has done the exact same. I don't know which way the causation goes there or what that relationship is, but it's certainly he's played at the level that we all know he can, and that I think a lot of folks kind of expect him to, and that frankly this team needs him to. Reynoso had his struggles this year, but he's kind of a known quantity, right? It's a fantastic quantity, but what to expect from him is it's who's going to be the other guy who can force defenders to adjust, and that's very much Fragapane, who's also a capable dribbler, can make excellent passes in the box. He's got really great vision to pick his head up once he's dribbling inside there, and is obviously just fine putting the shot on frame as well. And so I think him, is this form sustainable? A goal or an assist every game? Probably not. But this confidence that he's playing with, this level of contribution, that certainly is sustainable, and probably needs to be, especially if this attack is going to be kind of experimental going forward.
I don't know how you say challenge accepted in Portuguese, but I think Franco might be accepting that challenge, Eli. MJ, Eli mentioned Franco's form kind of coming into Minnesota United's form, and how that's really not a coincidence. I also think it's not a coincidence that Franco Fragapane and Luis Samaria, them coming into form, has led to a more in-form Emmanuel Reynoso. When he's able to have those pieces around him clicking on all cylinders, obviously he is able to do more of what he can, what he's capable of. MJ, can you talk? Are you able to speak?
Can you hear me now?
I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. So
you were giving me the faces. You were acting like, I don't know if I can hear you. So I just wanted to make sure that we're good.
I just want to say that I wasn't the only one saying if our front four can get on the same page. And of course, I thought our front four would be Fragapane, Lod, Amaria, and Reynoso. But considering what it is now, yes, it's not just individuals, right? This is a team sport. Getting those attacking players on the same page, building chemistry. You're seeing now where Reynoso, Luis Amaria, and Fragapane are looking for each other. They're looking for Hongwane. They're looking for them to be certain spots, and it's less work, right? It's those passes aren't missing by much, or Reynoso's looking that through ball up the center, and Luis Amaria is more on the same page as Reynoso, where you weren't seeing that earlier in the season. I also just want to add on the Fragapane thing, I never thought I'd say, there's someone who's playing good defense. But tonight, he's playing some pretty good defense. And not only that, I never thought I'd say Lod's tracking back and playing good defense. Now he's in a different position. But Lod was actually – they were doing what in other sports you call a bracket or a two-person zone, and where Fragapane usually was the more forward player. Lod usually was the back player, but sometimes they would invert. And they were like zone/man marking pairs of players pretty well tonight, even late into the game, where on tired legs or just I'm an attacking player, it's not my job to go back, you would see not that sort of defensive effort. So that was nice to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. You have three guys there on the left, and Fragapane, Lod, and Kamar Lawrence, who, by the way they've played, they've shown they can really cover every inch of the pitch individually. Right, Kamar Lawrence can get up in the attack and send in crosses. Robin Lod, playing defensive midfield, can play back and be that big defensive midfield presence. Or obviously he can get forward and cause havoc in the attack as well. And now, as you mentioned, MJ, you had Fragapane sort of assisting in defense and kickstarting counterattacks and helping force turnovers. That left-hand side has sort of been a bit of a crater for Minnesota United in years past, where they really haven't had nearly the same level of impact on the left as they had on the right. But now it's almost symmetrical in that way. And maybe even the left-hand side is, maybe you could argue, more dangerous than what they're able to bring on the right now. Eli, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think there's a legitimate case for that, right? Like, for this Minnesota United team as it was built was always, strong side, right side, with Metaneer there, but that's very quickly changed. What I think was actually interesting tonight specifically was that the strong side of Minnesota United's attack was the weak side, depending what side they were going after. And part of that was Benitez. I'm going to show to those who are watching, these are my game notes. The second thing I wrote down, it was in the 3rd minute, I wrote, Benitez looks good going down the weak side.
Yeah, he does.
That ended up producing the game-winning goal later on. So I'd like it to be known by everyone that I spotted that early. But that looked like a game plan thing that, he's a guy who can push going down there. And I think that's something that translates well to any opponent, forcing their fullbacks to, be watching the guy going off their shoulder. And so that transcends right side, that transcends left side. It's strong side, weak side. And if Benitez or Kamar Lawrence or whoever it is willing to pounce on that, that's a really great attacking setup. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I'm going to get a script or a penmanship expert to come in there, Eli, and confirm that you actually wrote that in the 3rd minute and didn't write it 5 minutes ago and then backdate it to the 3rd minute. So just be aware of that. I'll make that appointment tomorrow. MJ, you were raising your hand.
Just want to piggyback on that. In previous years for Minnesota United, teams knew what we were going to do. We were going to attack up the right side because that's where Metaneer was. That's where Lod was. And we, like you said, we knew what we were going to do. Everyone else knew what we were going to do. And that made us easier for teams to defend against us. It is nice to see some variety and some breadth. And again, just trying to give opponents different looks.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It makes the attack so much more dynamic when you can attack on the flanks the way they have and have that overlapping ability be on both sides. And I think that's one of the biggest differences in this particular Minnesota United team. And I honestly think one of the biggest factors, I wrote this 3 or 4 weeks ago now, I think maybe after the DC match, about sort of the 3 biggest reasons why Minnesota had been able to turn it around, not just in getting results, but the goal scoring output. And I talked about Kamar Lawrence's overlapping on the left, actually providing some symmetry to their overlapping ability. Because you're right, MJ, it was always up the right-hand side. Chase Gasper, God love him, great defender. He was never overlapping up the left. That was never happening, right? So you have a guy like Kamar Lawrence who's constantly getting into the attacking third and sending in crosses. You have Alan Benitez or DJ Taylor, whichever one's playing on the right, able to get in. Shit, we've seen them both connect. We've seen them connect on goals in the Vancouver match, right? So it's provided that different dynamic to this team. And when you talk about taking pressure off of guys like Reynoso, I think adding 2 more attacking players who are actually defenders into that mix just helps that exponentially increase.
Yeah, well, I mean, Heath likes 2-way players, especially at fullback, and the 2 center midfielders. He likes those players to be 2-way players. What we've had problems in the past is too many of those 2-way players are all up in attack and not enough are sharing on the defensive role. So what I'm looking forward to in these next few games is to see, can we get more consistency on who's going to go up? Hey, this player's up. I need to hang back.
Mm-hmm. Eli, that brings us right into, you mentioned Benitez a little bit. Let's get into his performance a little further and dig into that. So there were a couple of instances, specifically off set pieces, where the back post seemed to be left wide open on Benitez's side. There was one particular, I think it was the second one. Dane makes a great save on it, but it just seems like Benitez sort of just drifts into the middle of the box, and Moyer is right there on the back post, wide open, and that happened multiple occasions. But then Benitez comes up and he ends up getting the winner. So what do you make of Alan Benitez's sort of full performance from both a defensive and an attacking, spot tonight? And actually, Adrian Heath did comment on this pretty extensively in the press conference, and I'll get to that. But before I mention what he said, I want to get your guys' input on it.
Yeah, I think when this plays into what I see Dave Stevens asked in the comments there about kind of the defensive abilities of the fullbacks, because it was up until the Benitez goal, I think a performance that a lot of folks would feel pretty comfortable criticizing. And I was talking during the game with Jacob Schneider, Sota Soccer's own, and we were kind of trying to figure out what felt off about Benitez's performance. Was it him individually? Was it the system and kind of him getting used to the system? And the conclusion that I think I came to, that I think is still very debatable, and so you guys are very welcome to disagree with this, but what I noticed tonight that seemed new to me was Minnesota United defending in a back three. It's been a back four very consistently for a very long time, but what I noticed this time was that the strong side fullback, so whatever side the ball was coming down, that fullback was being given clearance to play out really wide and be really aggressive in going to the ball. And then what that meant was that the weak side fullback, who was on the far side of the field, was actually tucking in and playing as a third center back. And that was something that Benitez was tasked with a lot, because Shaq Moore was aggressive on Nashville's right, Minnesota United's left. They attacked that side very regularly, so Benitez was very often the weak side, basically center back in that back three. Now, that didn't look very comfortable to him. He looked like he was constantly kind of checking his position of, am I playing narrow enough? And that leaves a lot of space behind, which I'm sure as a fullback is just anxiety inducing to not know what's behind your back shoulder. And that requires you to have your head on a swivel. It requires you to have, the flexibility, mobility to be able to swing your hips really fast, to adjust to a threat coming down on your weak side, on your back side, and close that down. And that's where Benitez seemed to struggle. And so I don't think we can place a lot of blame on Benitez and say, he played terribly defensively. I think it might be the system in that aspect. And I don't quite know if that was an adjustment specific to Nashville, if that's something that Heath is trying to implement down the stretch here, if that's something he wants to do specifically with Benitez. But just like the weak side fullback was a strength in the attack, it was also kind of the weak spot in defense here. So I'm curious if either of y'all saw anything along those lines. But that was kind of my observation, was that it was just sort of an awkward setup that put the weak side fullback under some pressure there, and that happened to be Benitez a lot more than Kamar Lawrence tonight.
MJ, I'll let you give your input, and then I'll jump in.
Certainly, great observation on the back three and the shift of the back three, especially when right fullback was up. I would say that when it looked like it was working for the Loons was when Robin Lod would drop back and be that left fullback, or kind of in that area, helping protect the width that Benitez was worried about. And that gets to my point earlier about Lod looking good on defense.
Does this, I guess you sort of alluded to it, Eli, when you said you didn't know if this is specific to Nashville or something they would be doing moving forward. Is this scalable? Is this kind of defensive shift? If this is sort of if let's just hypothetically say that this is sort of a new defensive mentality that Adrian Heath is sort of implementing with this team, that they are going to sort of make this shift, and with this attacking ability of these fullbacks, sort of get whoever that weak side fullback is, or the strong side fullback, full reign to get forward, and then they'll just defend with the back three to make up for it. Is that scalable? A. And B, does a guy like Jonathan Gonzalez, who seems to be more of a traditional defensive-minded six, at least from what we've heard, does that help at all, being that you have a guy who can actually drop into defense? Because it seems like this whole season they're playing with a bunch of eights at defensive midfield. Guys who all are blessed, God love them, with ability to get forward in the attack, and that's all they want to do. But you got to have, in Adrian Heath's system, a defensive-minded defensive midfielder in there. So I guess two-part question. A, is this scalable? B, does the insertion of a guy like Jonathan Gonzalez make it more digestible? I think very weird hypotheticals, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think the answer to both of those is, yes, with an asterisk. I like, I like the point about Robin Lod being a really good defensive presence. He put in a performance tonight that was the closest to an Ozzie Alonso performance I've seen from anyone on Minnesota United this year, in terms of dropping back both in possession to receive the ball and dropping back between the center backs. Kervin Arriaga did it too, and I'll want to talk about their dynamic, but I'll save that for later on. But I think whether that's Robin Lod playing in that role, whether it's Gonzalez or Arriaga, Rosales, whoever it is there, dropping back between the center backs is vital to any team's success, Minnesota United especially, because we all know how Ozzie Alonso helped this team when he was playing in that role. So I think that helps automatically. I do think the approach is scalable. However, it does kind of depend on opponent, because every team in this league is, more or less going to have a favorite side that they want to attack, right? That might be in a case like Nashville that, they have Shaq Moore who wants to get down there. It might be they might decide that on a matchup basis if they might say, oh, you know what, we want to go after Kamar Lawrence, or we want to try to go after Benitez. So, that's going to put pressure on just the other fullback in that instance. And I think if it's going to be a team that's going to attack down Minnesota United's left like Nashville did tonight, that's going to require Bongi to have defensive responsibilities, which I don't think is something we've really seen a whole lot. Even tonight, the natural adjustment to make there would be to tell him, hey, you're responsible for anybody who comes charging down that weak side flank that Benitez doesn't see, right? Like, him having that defensive assignment would be kind of the natural fix here. It's not as simple as that, right? But, that's kind of the tweak there. So it might be scalable if Bongi can do that. I think, Fragapane can certainly do that. We saw him do that tonight pitching, and Robin Lod can do that. We saw him pitching, and we'll see what Menor Garcia can do. But, I think it's scalable in that sense. Also, just time helps with this system. Benitez will feel more comfortable with where he needs to be and who he needs to be monitoring. I'd be curious if this, continues to play out. What happens if Kamar Lawrence is the weak side fullback put in this spot? How does he handle it? So, I think there's reason to like this idea, of packing the box, but also, improvements that need to happen, that these 8 weeks will be really crucial for building the defensive side and not just figuring out who the attackers will be.
Eli, we all know your opinion of how a back three could work for Minnesota United is not at all biased. So,
yeah, no, I didn't by any means take a screenshot when I saw the back three to just, hang up on my wall and, just look at and think happy thoughts about.
Oh, man. So in the post-game presser, Adrian Heath, I asked about Benitez's defensive positioning specifically, about how there seemed to be a couple of free headers on the back post on Benitez's side. And Heath actually said he thought Benitez's defensive positioning tonight was better than it was against Colorado. And he basically alluded to the fact that he had a long conversation with Benitez after the Colorado match about his defensive positioning and what needed to be different, what he wanted to see from him. And he thought that was better tonight. Obviously, the two near goals loom large and are very front of mind for a lot of Minnesota United faithful out there. And Benitez got a lot of the blame for that. I saw a lot of, calling for him to be subbed off at halftime and things like that. MJ, what did you think while you were watching the match of Benitez's performance, and given sort of the context of the conversation and other things, does that change the opinion at all?
I do think it's shaky, because going back to what Eli was saying about, and you as well, about having center midfielders with clear roles. With Ozzie Alonso, we knew he was going to be the six. Yep. And sure, Gregush would find himself back there a few times, but definitely a clear role. Now that it's central midfield by committee and who doesn't have yellow cards and who's healthy, it is more of the sense of, are they changing who the six is based on our opponent? Are they changing it just situationally of like, hey, be fluid, someone always has to be back there, and then that doesn't always work. So I would like to see the coaching staff, and maybe they've tried this, simplifying it, where just like, hey, Lute, you're the six this week. You have to be the six. And that doesn't mean you never get to go forward. That just means, like, more often than not, you're hanging back. And on the Jonathan Gonzalez piece, I'm sorry, I'm not answering your question at all. It's okay. If he's going to be the six, I agree with the asterisk, but for different reasons. Kervin Arriaga was slated to be a natural six for this team. Gregush was initially marketed as we have our six. This coaching staff and the scouting staff have not really proven to me, other than a known quantity in Ozzie Alonso, they know what a six is or what it looks like before they come to Minnesota United. So since I haven't watched a lot of any of Jonathan Gonzalez's games in Liga MX, I can't say, but I would say wait and see.
All right. Well, we will get back into the conversation in, I don't know, about a minute or so. But first, got to shout out our good friends over at 9th Street Soccer and Coffee. You can see my face and half of Eli's there. Sorry, Eli. You're cut off a little bit.
And the face of me.
And yeah, it's completely blocking. I wonder if I can move this around at all. Hold on.
No.
Here's Eli. Eli, you're going to ventilate this for me. 801 South 9th Street, Minneapolis, is where you can find our friends over at 9th Street Soccer and Coffee. Basically, the combination of the two, or now the three best things you could ever want in life. Indoor soccer facility where you can play in rain or shine or 100 degrees or negative 100 degrees. Doesn't matter. They have pickup going on at 9th Street. You can rent out that field time for your team, if you're a coach, for your party or a group outing, whatever it is. And then on the other side of the wall there, they have a coffee shop, and they are now serving beer at 9th Street as well. The best just got better. Coffee, soccer, and beer. What else could you want? So hit them up. 9thstreetmpls.com. You can see it spelled out right there. NINTHSTREET MPLS.com. That's also the handle. You can find them at Twitter and Instagram at 9th Street MPLS. Derek Swanson and the people at 9th Street are huge supporters of the Minnesota soccer community, sponsoring local teams like Minneapolis City. They had a pop-up at all the Minnesota Aurora home matches as well. So if you want to support somebody who's trying to support the Twin Cities soccer community, definitely go check out our friends over at 9th Street Soccer and Coffee. You will not regret that decision. It is a very, very fun place to go hang out. If you're whether you're a soccer player, a soccer fan, both, doesn't matter. If you enjoy soccer in any form, you're going to enjoy 9th Street Soccer and Coffee. So hit them up. 801 South 9th Street, Minneapolis is where you can find them, or you can check them out online, 9thstreetmpls.com. All right, there's MJ again. MJ, how you doing? There was
9th Street logo looks way better than my face. I'm just saying. You could just leave that up the whole post Loons.
Oh, we're gonna have you Vanna White the next one, MJ. Don't worry.
Okay.
I want to get into a question from Paul Forrester. This is something that I didn't see too much of. So I'm not sure if I can comment too intelligently on this. So I wonder if you guys can help me out. It says, just tuning in. Not sure if you covered it yet, but do you guys think anything happens retroactively with Boxy for the Sapong incident? I didn't see this. Did either of you?
Actually, no. Sorry. I saw the ref be very
last hope.
Yeah, I didn't see a ton, to be honest. It seemed like Boxy was being Boxy and messing with Sapong a little bit. I think it was a set piece of some variety. And then the clip that I saw that caught my attention was Sapong, having words with Boxy after and grabbing him by like the ear or the neck or having a hold there. If I were guessing, that's what would interest the disco. But I'm not sure. To be honest, I think the lack of any prolonged VAR look in game is kind of an indicator that this isn't really something that the committee would want to go look at. But they do as they wish. We can only guess at what might be going on in their heads.
Yeah. Thank you for the explanation there, Eli. Really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, best I can do.
MJ, what are your thoughts? That kind of brings up the officiating angle to this, and I saw some harsh criticism on the Twitter machine of tonight's ref. I definitely thought that the card distribution and the foul distribution was very, very interesting and maybe a little bit inconsistent. It seemed like he let the game get away from him, and then he sort of maybe tried to overcorrect by giving everybody a yellow card. MJ, what are your thoughts on the officiating tonight?
I just would say that it was very inconsistent until it was consistently just giving yellow cards to everybody. There were times where calls would go against the Loons, and I didn't like it when I saw it live, but when I saw it on the replay, for example, the 1-for-1 when Mukhtar collided with Reynoso, and then Fragapane, had the revenge tackle on Mukhtar. I was screaming it, like, call the first one. And then I noticed that, one, Reynoso didn't get ball. Reynoso was late challenging Mukhtar and basically just ran into Mukhtar's shoulder. So that's not going to be a call in the Loons' favor. And then I watched Fragapane. It's like, yeah, that's a yellow card. So I thought that was actually a good call. I also thought the time that we had an attacking chance where Reynoso ended up, I believe, nutmegging.
Yep. I don't know who it was. Or
no,
I
it was
remember who
Walker Zimmerman. He megged Walker Zimmerman, but like the ref played advantage, and I was just like, you haven't been playing advantage when the Loons have had a foul against them and attacking chances all night, and now you choose to play advantage. No complaints, glad he did it, but it was just, again, very inconsistent. And then again, I agree with you, Jeremy, that when push came to shove and he starts yellow carding everything, it's basically overcompensation because he did lose control of the game.
Eli, any specific opinions?
Not particularly. I did think that we were in for a special kind of ironic treat when the FS1 broadcast opened the referee discussion with talk of how few yellow cards he had historically given out, and then proceeded to follow that with a yellow card feast. That was my only real takeaway there. I think Fragapane toed the line on a second yellow. He probably came about as close to that as you can realistically go. But other than that, not much to add. I think MJ summed it up well there.
We can't forget to talk about the 7D chess that Adrian Heath was playing, giving Walker Zimmerman just enough minutes in Wednesday's All-Star game to make him fatigued and cause him to have that lazy clearance that led to Minnesota United's first goal. Just you got to love it. Just, chess, not checkers. When you have the opportunity to coach two players that you're playing against 3 days later, you got to do what you got to do, and I respect that. This
is the closest you're going to see Adrian Heath admitting that midweek game performance actually affects whether someone should be subbed in or subbed out in a weekend performance. He will never admit to this explicitly. It is only in this subtle all-star weekend that you get this sort of vibe of like, yeah, maybe playing a full 90 midweek could affect someone's performance the next weekend.
There was that thought, we got to about the 65th, 70th minute, and we hadn't seen any subs for Minnesota United, and Stu Holden was even saying it on the broadcast, like some tired legs out there for the Loons, and that's kind of been a common theme. But you do see the right button pushed when he brings in Rosales, and just a few minutes later leads to the goal. So while we may not have been, 100% on board with the timing, he made the right substitution at the time, and obviously led to the goal. So I guess Heath giveth and Heath taketh away with the second half substitutions.
I would like to see us make substitutions separate from tactical decisions and changes, and also second half tactical changes separate from substitutions. But having coached other sports where you can sub people on the fly, it is very hard in soccer to talk to players while the game's going on, right? It's very hard to make those tactical shifts. This is in baseball where Heath is, giving signals to players to switch formations or to switch ideas of how they're going to defend or how they're going to attack. So while I see other teams do it, and I see other teams do it, and I see other teams make tactical decisions separate from substitutions, I understand that it's really easy. You have a new player coming in, and you can combine the two, and it worked tonight.
Eli, what are your thoughts on sort of the formation shift in the second half to the 4-3-3, the timing of it, all of that?
Yeah, I think it certainly worked personnel-wise, and I think that's one of the assets that this team has. When we talk about the depth, there's also flexibility in terms of formation. that, Heath can play around a lot with personnel in terms of what he wants this team to look like, and including Robin Lod being able to, play anywhere that isn't the back line. And frankly, at this point, we shouldn't rule out seeing him there at some point. He's the new Hassani Dotson in that sense. And so, I think we saw it tonight, that worked out in favor of this team. Rosales has been excellent coming off the bench all year at filling that, kind of impact sub midfielder role. And he played a role in the goal as well. I think it was also important to see Arriaga continue to be involved in the game down the stretch, to see Bongi be a contributing factor. I think the longevity of some of those performances was just as important as the substitutions tonight, which I'm sure, makes Adrian Heath very happy, because he isn't a coach who likes to tinker too much with his team as the clock ticks closer to 90.
Guys, we're going to stick around for maybe 10 or 15 more minutes. We're getting close to midnight here. If you have any last-minute questions or comments for us to respond to, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We really appreciate all the interaction and all the viewership tonight. It has been awesome. But as we look ahead here, guys, so you get Austin next weekend. You're back at home, back at Allianz Field. We had a comment earlier about how, Austin seems to be within striking distance. And this match coming up is, could be a big 6-pointer for not only catching Dallas in fourth, or catching Dallas in third, but maybe even having an opportunity to reach Austin there in the second spot. But this is an Austin team that has been very, very up and down as of late. They get that big comeback win last night. Sebastian Driussi scoring in stoppage time. Obviously, he's the odds-on MVP frontrunner right now. What does Minnesota United have to do to keep this going against, what is proven to be a very much improved, to say the least, Austin team, obviously one of the class teams of the Western Conference? Eli?
Yeah, I think contain Driussi is the obvious one, and that will be a test of this defensive setup. However this is going to play out. I also think, for one, if the Loons are going to be able to catch Austin, they need to win in that game. Because they're down 10 points right now with 9 games to go, which is a lot of ground to make up. But that becomes a lot more doable if you win and it's 7 points. It becomes impossible if you lose and it's 13, right? And a draw really, just doesn't get it. That doesn't help at that stage. You need to be making up ground every week. So a win needs to happen. I think in terms of the attack, this might be a situation where it actually is helpful to have a guy like Garcia coming in and factoring into this game, whether that's starting, whether that's off the bench, and being an unknown. Because we're at the point in the season where every team in this league knows what every other team in this league is trying to do, right? If you're Minnesota United, that, with Austin, Driussi's the guy you got to watch out for. What Austin doesn't know is what to expect from Garcia and how he's going to fit in there. They also don't know what to expect from, Gonzalez either, if he's going to play a role. So this is where Adrian Heath, through the fate of the transfer market, being able to still hold a couple cards close to his chest at this stage might be a real asset, that he can mix that in there. And again, we talk about this depth and flexibility. It's hard to plan for. If I'm Austin FC's scouting team, I'm looking at a guy like Robin Lod and, having to prepare a lot of guys on the field to face him in some capacity, because you just don't know where he's going to end up playing. You don't know how this team's going to be organized. And, we're seeing some defensive twists be thrown in at this stage of things. So some of that unpredictability, if it can be effective, could be a really key element of a game plan to victory against Austin.
MJ, we've seen some marquee wins for Minnesota this year, far more than we've seen maybe in years past. Some real statements made. In addition to the impact on the standings, Saturday's game is obviously important from just a measuring stick standpoint and proving that you can compete with one of those top teams in the West, and that if it comes down to that one-game playoff scenario, you are an absolute threat to knock a team off in advance. What are you looking for as somebody who wants to see Minnesota United obviously be talked about in that upper echelon of the Western Conference? Would a good performance in a draw would that do, or do you think they need to come out and get 3 points to sort of prove that point on Saturday?
You're playing a team that is higher in the table, but as Eli said, if we want to catch them, we have to win. So, I want to see us win. Here's the thing: as well as Austin is playing so early in their MLS existence, they just beat a bottom of the table Sporting Kansas City team 4-3 at home. Yep. They only won by 1 goal. They allowed 3 goals. I hope
1.5.
Yeah, and I hope that the coaching staff is watching that game and learning what Sporting Kansas City did. I think in addition to Juicy as Eli, definitely someone that we need to contain. Also need to contain Alex Ring, and Maxi Arruti likes to score goals. So, Alex Ring is going to cause a lot of problems, and whoever we have playing in that center midfield dual pivot role for Minnesota United, they need to be aware of both of those players because those players are going to attack that space.
All right. So the obvious answer to this question is Dane St. Clair. So I'm going to remove him from contention for this. Give me your man of the match tonight, sans DSC.
This is difficult, Jeremy. I think I'm going to say Robin Lod, just because I think he's the player who impressed me the most role-wise with those defensive contributions, and is maybe the player who, moving forward from this game, I'm the most optimistic about what he could look like in that role. Again, like I said earlier, I think he did the best Ozzie Alonso impression that anyone has done this season tonight, and that intrigues me going forward. I've been generally intrigued by him playing in this central midfield role, but I think tonight really sealed that. I think my second choice would be Fragapane, just because he's continued to produce. But I'll be kind of quirky and hipster and say Robin Lod.
MJ,
I'm gonna go. So my first choice is maybe obvious, and that's Reynoso. I thought his contributions he won't get an assist for. I don't think he gets a hockey assist for our second goal, but.
So that's a question because John Strong said 2 assists for Reynoso tonight. I don't know if he did that knowing some sort of weird hockey assist rule that MLS is implemented, or if Fox Sports is going by their own statistical model. Who knows? But no, I was wondering about that because, wait, no, it's definitely Rosales who got the assist on the second goal. Does Ray get credit? I don't think he does.
But he deserves credit for just dribbling like a madman and causing them difficulties, and
Absolutely.
Definitely springing that counterattack for our second goal. And then my second is actually Debasi. Debasi just defensively tonight really impressed me, as he's done previous times this year. But again, it's that defensive consistency that we're looking for. And so if we can have more of this Debasi and less the getting lost with what's around him on a multiplayer attack, Debasi, I'm liking it.
I'm going to go, he didn't get on the stat sheet tonight, but I'm going to go Bongi. His work rate tonight was excellent, I thought. And he showed if he can just add one element to his game, changing direction, then that will just exponentially increase the impact that he can have. He is so good north-south. He is so good pushing the pace. He is so good sort of making things happen and advancing the ball into that attacking third and getting into those straight line situations. But when it comes time to change direction to evade a defender, he just doesn't seem to have that yet. He doesn't seem to have that ability to sort of move and shift and change on a dime right now. Hopefully that's something he can add to his game, because I think that would absolutely take him next level and, continue to increase and enhance that impact that he's had. But I thought from a straight work rate standpoint and the impact that he had and just the work he did on the ball and in the attack overall, I thought Bongi was excellent tonight. He did everything short of score a goal, and he was a Joe Willis boot away from getting one. So I thought he just continues his great run of form over this whole great Minnesota United run.
in on the Bongi note, I talked earlier about how we've seen him develop, but what really impressed me tonight with him, and I think he's a really fun choice, Jeremy, was his hold up play. There was a sequence, and I can't remember. It might have been that shot that hit the bar in the first half. Maybe it was the first goal. I know I'm forgetting, but it was a long ball to him that instead of I feel like his natural instinct is to take the ball and dribble, right? And that's his skill set, right? That makes sense. But what he did here was actually he held it up and held off a defender. It might have even been Walker Zimmerman, who has a size advantage on Bongi, and should win that matchup 9 times out of 10. But Bongi held up the ball and laid it off to somebody else. I wish I remembered more specifics of that sequence, but in the moment that really impressed me, and that's something that in April Bongi wouldn't do. And so that kind of development is really encouraging, that he's gone from being kind of a just guy of intrigue who you want to see get a run out on the wing every once in a while to a legitimate piece of this offense, who like MJ said is getting looks from guys, is really contributing here, and doing more than just dribbling around. I've really enjoyed seeing that kind of integration into the offense from him.
Yeah, it's been awesome, and he's really, his continued evolution has been awesome to just watch this season. Obviously, he's gotten those couple goals to get himself off that schneid, and he's just continuing to make that impact. So that's been impressive. All right, we got one more sponsor shout out, and MJ, I promised you would get the Vanna White treatment on this one, so here we are. Pence Homes, Nate Pence, our boy, does great work supporting the Minnesota soccer community. He sponsored Minnesota Aurora, Minneapolis City, our friends over at Equal Time Soccer, who do a great job covering the women's game across the state, and of course us here at Sota Soccer and the Post Loons post game show. Nate is not only ingrained in the Minnesota soccer community and interested in supporting them, he's interested in helping you sell your home for top dollar and get a new home at a rate that will not break your bank. Nate knows this market. He has the team and the technology to help you get into your dream home, sell your current home at top dollar, do both, whichever you're doing, buying, selling, whether you're doing both. It's a very, very stressful process, and nobody can help you take all the stress out of that process. But Nate and his team at Pence Homes do an excellent job of helping relieve as much of that stress as humanly possible. So if you want somebody who knows the market, who knows what they're doing, who has the team and the technology to get the job done and help you, accomplish that goal you're looking for, whatever it is, when it comes to getting into that new home, make sure that you hit up Nate. And you can go to their website to do that, pencehomes.com. You can see that at the bottom, pentzhomes.com, or you can email Nate directly. You see his name, Nate, Nate, at pencehomes.com. If you're buying or selling or both in St. Paul or Minneapolis, you got to hit up our friends over at Pence Homes, pencehomes.com. Excellent job there, MJ. Eli just getting and sliding in Chris Collinsworth style. NFL season is upon us, and Eli doing his best Chris Collinsworth, so I love that. There was one more question I want to ask you guys before we get out of here. We've been at this for an hour and 4 minutes. It is officially after the stroke of midnight. It's August 15th. What's the one thing that we're still looking for from Minnesota United to assure us that they can be a team that takes that next step this season? They've been on a great run. They've got some great road wins. They're sitting up near the top of the West, just 1 point off third right now in mid-August, which everybody would have taken 100 times out of 100 if we asked this question in February. But what's sort of that one thing that is missing, or that one thing that they need to either add to their repertoire or just shore up and tighten up to, kind of take that next step and maybe advance further into the playoffs?
I think it's defensive comfort, and comfort with the system and the personnel. If that's going to be Benitez, great. If it's I would assume that's the route it's going to go. Again, we talked kind of at length about how that fit looked tonight, and there's still time to iron that out. But if this team's going to succeed in the playoffs, you can't be giving up 2.5 expected goals per game. That model exists for a reason, and that's because it evens out in the long run. That you can steal games like this, which is so important and something that Dane St. Clair, like we said, obviously helps with. But if you want your best shot at winning in a 1-game setting, it would be to keep things as calm and locked down as possible. on the defensive end. When we think about this team's playoff run that was 2020, both with the MLS's back tournament and then, in the actual playoffs that fall, that team was a fantastic defensive team. I feel like I talk about them all the time, but it really was, defensive masterclasses over and over again. Reclaiming some of that magic, I think, is very possible with this personnel group. I think it's, probably the same or maybe even a little improved personnel wise from 2020. It's about locking it down and figuring out what that game plan is going to be. If it's going to be this back three with the fullbacks, switching in and out, I think, again, that's a system that can work. Who the six dropping in is going to be, that has to be ironed out, and just, being consistent so that it's not last ditch defending. That's always going to happen at a certain point in this sport because attackers create chaos. But, removing the less Dane St. Clair can do, obviously, the better. And that, that comes from feeling comfortable there, so that guys are just executing the defensive game plan.
MJ?
I have to completely agree with Eli. I will use different nouns for variety. But instead of defensive comfort, I will say defensive discipline and consistency. And everything that Eli just said about who's going to be our six, and then having that six be that lockdown defensive midfielder and helping the back four, having whoever our eight is be part of that back six when needed to be, and then just improve on whether it's win, lose, draw, whatever the result is. I know we like to focus on results here, but there's something about process and method and how you play the game. And whether we win, whether we lose, there's about 5 times every game where I'm just like, that should never happen defensively. That attack should not be that easy to obtain, whether that's letting up a goal in the first 12 seconds or whatever. It just shouldn't be that easy. Or tonight where there were near misses, right? Where there were like, oh, Sapong got into some dangerous spots, Mukhtar gets into some dangerous spots, and we don't have anybody marking them. No one's between them and the net. People are playing catch up. We can't consistently see breakdowns in defense like that.
I mean, we've seen 4 goals conceded in each of the last 2 matches before this one. So I think, defensively, whether that's shoring up the defensive midfield with a guy like Jonathan Gonzalez, or just finding a way to tighten things up along the back line, finding a new way to approach your defense to shore things up more along the back line. I think you guys are both right. It's that defensive side of the ball that Minnesota United needs to shore up, because they have the attack down. They have Luis Samaria, Franco Fragapane, Emmanuel Reynoso, Bangi Hlongwane. Like they finally have those attacking pieces clicking on all cylinders. And how many times in 2019, 2020, even last year, like, oh man, if only this attack was clicking, then we'd finally have everything clicking. And suddenly here we are, where this team is scoring goals at the wazoo, but suddenly they can't keep the ball out of their own net. Tonight was a different story because Dane St. Clair stood on his head, but the defensive lapses have been there, MJ, to your point. If you look at goals conceded across the entire season, doesn't look that bad. They're probably in the top half of the league still, but the eye test, and specifically these last couple weeks, have shown us that something needs to be tightened up along that defense. And I think it's at both levels. I think it's at the central midfield level. I also think it's along the back line. And hopefully tonight is sort of a step in the right direction, and we continue to see that shore up, whether it's Benitez or DJ Taylor. Personally, I think DJ Taylor brings you a little bit more defensive quality than a guy like Alan Benitez, but we know how much Adrian Heath really values that attacking aspect of the fullbacks too. So that's something to keep an eye on too. But yeah, I agree with you both. I think you have to shore up this defensive, the defensive side of the ball, because the way Minnesota, we saw it tonight, 37% possession. If you're going to be a team that concedes possession, that sits back, and then hits counters, you got to defend well. That's step one to that whole process, is you have to lock down defensively in order to give yourself the opportunity to counter effectively. And so that's obviously something that we need to see a little bit better of from just a consistency standpoint from Minnesota moving forward. All right, as we mentioned, the midweek off, but then we get Saturday, 7 p.m. kickoff against Austin, back at Allianz Field. A little programming notes. I'm going to be back in the press box at Allianz for the first time since. So, guys, this will be my first time in the Minnesota United press box with fans in attendance. I was in the press box for 2020 when there was no fans, which is actually kind of cool. Being one of the only people to watch live sports in 2020. But I was, I've been doing the post game show from my basement. Did it in my basement last year. Did it in my basement for the first part of this year. But I finally was able to talk to the PR team over at Minnesota United. Great people over there, and they're going to make sure we get set up to do the post game show in the press box. So that's going to be a lot of fun. So that's starting on Saturday for home games through the rest of the season. So pretty stoked about that. Eli, MJ, standing invite whenever you guys want to join me on Post Loons. Always happy to have you. I'll open up the floor before we get out of here. Final thoughts.
I'm just excited to see. Oh, go ahead, MJ. Go ahead.
On the defensive side of things, one thing that I really liked about today's that we gave up a lot of set pieces, corner kicks, free kicks to Nashville. And in general, we don't look good when they recycle the ball, especially when they recycle the ball to the weak side. But in general, that initial defense on that initial free kick, corner kick has been much improved recently, and especially this game.
Eli?
Yeah, I agree with that assessment. I think my biggest takeaway from just right now that we've talked about tonight is how much depth and how many options there are for this team. So I'm just excited for all the debate there will get to be over the next 8 games here over who should be in, who should be out, and all of that fun business. And also I'm excited for inevitably in about 4 or 5 weeks here that we learn that Jeremy has worked his way not just from broadcasting from the press box to probably broadcasting pitch side or something like that. From the locker room. My standing invite will be revoked and it'll be Dane St. Clair hopping on every week. Something like that. So I'm enjoying this while I can before I'm replaced by somebody far more important.
Nobody more important than you, Eli Hoff. Don't underestimate your importance to this product here. You too, Matthew Johnson. Really appreciate you, MJ, Eli. Thank you guys so much. Let's all go to bed, get some sleep. And what's with the hammer there, MJ? I love it. That's a good way to end the show. Hammer down, I guess. Minnesota United hammering down a 2-1 win on the road against Nashville. Their 6th road win of the season. That's an MLS club record. They're back at home. Big one from a measuring stick standpoint and from a standing standpoint against Austin on Saturday. Post Loons will be live from the Allianz Field press box. At least one half of it will be from the Allianz Field press box. So enjoy that and enjoy your week, guys. We'll catch you on Saturday. Have a good one.